So we are here to do an unboxing slash overview review of the IDOD Advanced Case Neck Turning Lathe from Brian Blake at fclassproducts.com. So full disclosure, Brian's a friend of mine. He's a machinist here in Phoenix. He's come up with this neck turning lathe to turn both the inside and the outside of the necks. The advantage of that, of course, is when you expand 6.5 284 brass to 7mm, you're expanding some of the shoulder brass into the neck. That brass is quite a bit thicker, the shoulder brass, than the neck, so you end up with a donut or a big thickening at the very base of the neck. In the past, I've turned all my brass on a lathe with a pumpkin in the 4-jaw chuck, and it's provided pretty good results. If you expand the brass, the idea is that you're pushing those imperfections to the outside, and then you're going to turn them off with the pumpkin. But the reality is, if you run an expander mandrel into those necks, even after they've been expanded and necks turned, you can still feel that thick brass there. So the idea with this is to turn both the insides, get a very consistent thickness, and you're turning off any imperfections, either whether they're on the inside or the outside. Now, the way I handle my brass is that I will fire form all this brass in a non-turned neck chamber, basically the same reamer but with the neck opened up, in this case to like 319.5. I'll fire all this brass. All the brass is moved to where it's going to go, and I don't have to run every case through an expanding die. So all this brass has been fire formed. So this is what comes with the product. Now this is a prototype, so some of these features and or functions may change, but basically this collet holds a Wilson neck trimming case holder. These are going to be available from Brian, or you can buy them at Sinclair. I believe Brian is going to... The problem with these in general is that this inside diameter is not always concentric to the outside diameter. We would like to have those both very concentric, or at least as concentric as possible. So Brian may put these on a mandrel and turn the outside so that both the ID and OD of this case holder will be concentric, which is kind of, if we're going to go through this much effort to turn necks, that would be nice. If you get these, I think, directly from Sinclair International, I don't believe they're very, very concentric. But that will come. This is a tool to be able to remove these case holders. This is a little ram that you insert into the back of the machine when you put your brass in to kind of tap it into that collet. This is a case removal tool that fits into the notch and will basically release that case, and then you can tap it out the back. I have seen Brian run this machine and not turn it off to remove these cases. We will be exploring that. Don't mind the writing on the dial. Brian has indicated which way to run the needle to move it in or out. This dial is a 1/10,000th indicator that is adjusted by this little micrometer head down here, and as you turn it, it will move this whole, I'll call this the base. It'll move the whole base in and out, so you can make relatively equal cuts inside or outside. If you wanted to trim more of the outside and just barely touch the inside, you can move it in or move it out. If you want to get more of the outside, not the inside, you can move it the other way. This little micrometer body here controls this cutter on the outside. The cutter on the inside is fixed. The one on the outside will move with this micrometer. It's at a 10-degree angle, so each thousandths on the micrometer is not going to move it a thousandths. There will probably be a piece of literature with the machine that will give you those numbers. As an example, if you want to move it in a half a thou, maybe you have to move this 7 thou. I'm not sure those numbers. Brian will provide the math. This little piece of Delrin here hits on the actual shoulder of the brass so that you can get a very consistent depth of cut on your shoulders, so you're not plunging too deep into the brass or sometimes not getting deep enough. I know on the pumpkin that depth is set by the mouth, the very end of this neck. And there are many times if you have a little brass shaving in the pumpkin, you can't get a complete cut to the neck. Or if this is a little bit short relative to some of the other brass, you end up digging into the neck quite a bit. So that's the basic machine, basic overview of the machine. We'll do a separate section to go through each individual control, actually how it works on brass and how to set it up. But for now, let's trim a piece. So this machine took me about 10 minutes or so to get set up for the neck thickness I want and the cut inside and outside. So that is exactly 12.5 thou. So great finish, both inside and outside. I'll try and get a close-up, but you can, at least I can see that it's completely cleaned up, both the inside and the outside. And I'm pretty happy with that shoulder depth. I don't really need to get into the shoulder too far since the inside blade is completely going to clean up the inside of the neck. Yeah, so that looks really good. Let's try another one. I'm gonna do one more with the machine off, and then I'm gonna try to insert and remove this brass with it running and see how that works. So it looks really good. Very consistent. I don't necessarily think this machine is any faster than some of the other options, but I also think that there's a limit to the finish you can get if you try and run it faster no matter what machine you're running. That is very, very smooth. Looks like this one may have like literally a smidge that didn't turn. Like I would say it's 95 to 98% clean. This one is completely cleaned up. But very consistent on the cut into the shoulder. Yeah, I think this looks really good. So I think I'm gonna try and run 100 pieces and just give you an idea of how long I think it takes. And then we'll do a complete overview of all the functions when I get done. All right, so I just finished turning 100 pieces of brass. Got a bit better feel for the machine. That 100 pieces of brass took a little over 36 minutes. So, I don't know, I think that's probably faster than the other methods I've used in the past. I think pros and cons. You know, pros, it seems to be very consistent. I like the stop for the cut into the shoulder. I had turned the necks off a couple of pieces of brass that were really short. So unless you trim everything and size it all first, this is a way to get very consistent cuts into the neck. I think maybe on that topic we'll take a little tangent. So for years I shot all my brass and then turned the necks. The thought was that the brass will flow. It's basically sizing the brass to the same size. It was always, I thought, a benefit. The problem was that we forced all the imperfections to the inside, and I really didn't feel like after the brass was shot that you could easily expand those imperfections to the outside to turn them off. Plus, I had to expand all the brass, which can be hard to do, and on the pumpkin you always hit that donut and it makes it difficult to feed. I think this takes care of a lot of those problems. When I was fire forming first, everything went smooth. When I started turning my brass before I shot it, the brass was all a bit different size. The length on the end of the neck was a bit different, or not always square, which was a problem. Sometimes you cut into the neck, sometimes you didn't get the neck cut at all. Plus, I think after you trim it, then you're gonna shoot it, and it's gonna move all that brass around again. So I think for me, shooting it in a slightly bigger neck, which means another barrel, or at least an old barrel with the neck opened up, is just a better approach. I think that the biggest impression I got from this machine was that it was just easy. Like with the lathe, I have to put a piece of brass in the shell holder, turn the shell holder tight, and then turn the neck. If I didn't get the shell holder tight enough, it spun the brass in the shell holder, which was a pain. And then I have to release the shell holder, get it turned to the right orientation so I could remove the case. It was a lot of work with my fingers, and it you know, after 100 pieces or so, you really start to, you know, get kind of some sore fingers. I think this way is pretty simple. It's actually enjoyable. That says a lot coming from a guy that hates turning necks. It's the most mundane thing I can think of in the reloading world. So pretty effortless, pretty consistent, easy really. 100 pieces took 36 minutes. That's pretty darn fast. I've spent days turning you know, 600 or 700 pieces of brass. So all in all, I think that it's a pretty nice piece of work. One thing I did forget to mention about this machine is that these dovetail guides run linear bearings. So I mean, it is as rigid as can be. I don't really have any cons per se. You may or may not have seen that when I ejected some of the brass, it fell into the collet and you can't really reach it from either side. So I have this wooden Q-tip that I just push it out. I was thinking maybe use a piece of welding rod or something, but I'm not sure I would be putting anything metal in there. Heaven forbid to get caught on something. Maybe you can just go steal a twig off your neighbor's tree, or I don't know, maybe Brian can provide a little 1/8-inch piece of Delrin or something you can poke in there. But I mean, that's the only thing that I kind of had to get a feel for. I think that when you tap the cases in the back, there's a bit of a feel. If you tap it really hard, it takes a bit of effort to get it to remove the case with the case removal tool. I did have a couple that I just tried to gently tap, and as I got to the shoulder, it moved the brass, which just means I just tapped it a little bit firmer. But I think that's about it as far as cons. I mean, it's a heavy-duty machine. It never even bogged down. It's, you know, it's pretty heavy. It's a machine. It's not a flimsy kind of a toy that you know, we used to hold the neck turning thing in our hand, and it was just a lot of work to put the shell holder in the shell in the shell holder that's in the drill, hold everything. This is pretty effortless, and you know, after doing 100 pieces, I'm not too worried about having to do the other 600 pieces that are left to do. So yeah, I think it's definitely gonna be a machine that I'll purchase at some point, and we'll go from there. Thanks. All right. Well, of 750 pieces of brass or so, I've got 2 left. So I thought with all of this brass now done, I would give you a couple of tips that I think might help a little bit. So the first one is how to get the very, very best finish on these necks. I think rather than be really slow in and out, I know, you know, if you've ever ran a lathe, some cutters don't always cut best going backwards. So for me, the best cut I have found is to go in fairly quickly, but consistently, and then come out really quickly. So this brings me to the other tip. Sometimes the brass doesn't stay out to tap back. I used to stick a Q-tip in there, but with your plunging tool, you can just push it back out lightly and then tap it out the back. So come in fairly quickly, pause at the shoulder, and then out. And if it stops in the middle like that, rather than poke something in there, you can just tap it forward, tap it out. So this brass was just fire formed, so it's dirty. And of course, that will build up in your collet. So Q-tip, brake clean. While it's running, you can just clean out that collet a little bit. So that's it. I think the neck turning excitement is certainly worn off after this many hours of turning necks, but I still think this is a great machine and a great way to turn necks. Very consistent, just much easier than having to put a shell on a shell holder all the time. And when you're done, you got 750 cases with turned necks. Alright, so we're going to go through the setup. Basically 3 adjustments. You have this adjustment, which basically moves both cutters in and out so you can center up on the wall. There is this adjustment, which brings the 2 cutters closer together so that you can adjust the depth of your cut. And then you have this adjustment, this Delrin moves in and out, and basically that's your stop so that you can adjust the cut into the shoulder. So I have never set this up before completely from scratch. So I backed the adjustment way out for the wall thickness. I've moved the blades in and then loosened this and moved it back. So we're gonna set this up together for the first time. So this brass has been turned, but I think maybe we'll try to go to 10 thousandths instead of 12.5. So the first thing I would do is make sure everything's clear so there's no contact, and then I would set up the side to side setting first. So I would run it in and I would carefully move the cutter back until we get just contact on the inside. So I'm just looking for the slightest bit of brass to show up. You can see the indicator moving. Okay, so I'm just getting a few shavings there. Okay, now I know this brass is 12.5 thick, so I know I need to bring this in. You want to keep backwards pressure on this cutter. You can see it moving. So I'm just going to creep it in until we get contact. Just getting a few shavings now. So the depth is not set, so I am going to just creep it in. We're just touching the outside until I get just to the shoulder I want. Okay. Now I'm going to set this stop. Now this may change as we move this cutter, but I think that's a good place to start. Okay, so let's see if I can do this on here. So that's right at just under 12 thousandths. Now again, there will be probably a chart with a direct correlation between the reading on the micrometer and the depth you're going in, but just go in like 4 thousandths. Just skimming. Getting a good cut on the shoulder. Okay, so we're at like 11. So we're going to come in just a little bit more here. Go another couple thousandths. Snug both of these set screws down. Just taking another little skim. Make sure you get all the brass out from the inside of those necks, or you potentially, if you measure across a little tiny little shard of brass, you may get a false reading. Okay, so we're still a little heavy. Keep backward pressure on that. Okay, still a little bit heavy. So the adjustment's quite fine. This is at, I believe, a 10-degree angle. from the axis, so it's going to take quite a bit of forward movement to move inward. So it cleaned up both the inside and the outside. We are right, or very, very close to 10 thousandths. I don't know if you can see, nice cut in the shoulder. There's no groove or no perceptible cut into the shoulder. So that's it. It's pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned about setting up. I'm sure with a little practice it'll become no problem.